Uh, Good morning. This is a meeting of the Policy Review Committee for Thursday, February 11th, and we are ready to convene the meeting and I'll call the meeting to order. Dr. Roush, roll call, please.
Chair Brown.
Yes, I hear.
Board Member Cole. Dr. Pierce.
Present.
Ms. Beasley. Ms. Klein.
Present.
Ms. Ellingson.
Present.
Mr. Holt.
Present.
Ms. White.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Wonderful. Wonderful. What we're going to discuss today is a bit different than we have in the past. We're not going to be going through the routine Neola matters, but instead we've got two bigger picture matters to talk about. One is a policy review that we will get to on revisions to board policy and how we handle resolutions. And the other is a discussion about revising the charter and working through that to the extent we can. Now, you may all know that the committees have been realigned and some have been renamed or repurposed, and that includes this committee. The changes were mostly the work of Jennifer Adair, our president, and she's going to join us, I believe, about 9 o'clock for a short time to provide a little after 9, and that's to provide her vision of what this committee should be or is all about. I will let you know that I don't yet have a handle on that, and I'm going to be hearing this from Jennifer mostly the first time, and that will help us, help guide us through the revisions to our charter so that we can make sure those align with the vision. And nobody better to do that than Jennifer. What we can do now, let's approve the minutes from December 10th. Do we have a motion?
I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
Thank you.
I second.
Great. Any questions? Any concerns about those minutes? Hearing none. Hearing none, those are, the approval is passed. Then we will have, then we can turn to the revisions to board policy. All of you should have a copy of that. It's a document called Resolution Process Policy number, I guess, not yet assigned?
Not yet assigned. This will be a part of the board bylaws. Neola will assign it a number should the board decide to adopt it.
Very good. Do you want to present it, Dr. Rush?
Certainly. So it is, we've seen a few more resolutions pop up here in front of the board over the last several months. And the discussion has been, and I think that in talking with board leadership, is we really don't have a process for how that kind of comes about or how those work. And I think there is also a desire to make sure that the board had ample time to really review and make sure that they could understand fully the impact of any resolutions that were presented to them. what had often happened in the past is a resolution would be added, it would be put on the agenda, and then be voted on simultaneously. I think there was a desire to make sure there was more time for fulsome discussion and research, and time for members to really kind of delve into it a little bit more. Then we also wanted to make sure that we provided some assistance if we needed to have resolutions drafted, that we could get that. And we wanted to create a process. A lot of this is done in writing as well. And excuse me 1 minute, I'm going to let Ms. Beasley in. But we also wanted to make sure that, we created kind of an actual process that's kind of ensconced so that, it'll last beyond any of us that are here, to really kind of drive at that. This is modeled off of the State Board of Education's resolution process, almost verbatim, with some tweaks just based on the fact and how the state board operates differently than a local board of education. But this is really designed to make sure that the public knows what we're doing, that the board knows what's going on with resolutions, that as amendments are coming about, we try to take time to really get those in writing to make sure that members know what those amendments are doing. We have had some occasion in the past where we've had to go back and review the tape to make sure we know what was said in a particular motion. So this tries to really kind of distill it to writing so that there's no confusion at this point. I think Chair Brown asked yesterday, to what does this apply? What is a resolution? I think that's certainly something that we can have a greater discussion on how to define those parameters. Unlike a lot of districts, we kind of have an area that we call board legislation, which are kind of those routine matters. We're not viewing this for that process on the board legislation front, but more so those non-routine things that come up, be they, resolutions to perhaps waive a policy or amend, to waive a certain policy for a period of time, or to waive fees or fines, or to take some other action, such as, the board expressing its support or opposition to particular legislation, really kind of those non-routine matters. The question has come up. I don't have a good answer. I think it's good for this committee to discuss whether this should apply to honorary resolutions as well. Honorary resolutions are those kind of things like we're recognizing, it's Teacher Appreciation Week, or we're honoring somebody on their retirement. Those matters typically fall a different place on the board agenda. The way this is written now is that we'd all go under board matters. We could certainly draw that distinction, or we could just apply this, draw an exception to the honorary resolutions. I think that's another good conversation piece to have here as well. So with that, I will turn it over back to you, Mr. Chair, to kind of lead the discussion on this process.
Thank you. And that was a helpful presentation to focus us on this process. I have the biggest question I raised with it was the one about what this applies to, and as Eric mentioned, my experience, because I served elsewhere for 15 years and I worked with some other school districts, I have not seen a process like ours before, where we have some matters that are tagged legislative matters and others that are tagged resolution. And most boards, I believe, or many boards at least, everything's a resolution. So that's why I asked the question. And at least from my perspective, we should talk about honorary resolutions, and perhaps add a couple of items to this, dealing with what kind of honorary resolutions are appropriate for the board to consider, because it can get out of hand with anybody bringing any board member bringing any person that they want to honor in this fashion to the board for the board to pass something, and it may have little or no connection to the school district. I think that's also a good topic. Sometimes with a number of those, and this occurred in the past more often than it has recently, there would be a handful of honorary resolutions, and after we discuss and act on each one, and sometimes the presentation would run a little while, we would then all get up and take a picture with the honorary and then go back and sit down. Ended up consuming a large amount of time. So I'd be interested in seeing if we can work on something. The other matter that I raised and is now included, initially this was it was suggested that in 1B that a resolution in writing not only should be presented 1 week in advance, but that the board liaison who receives that should notify the two board officers, superintendent and treasurer, and consistent with my belief, and I think that of our board, this will go to all board members. I couldn't think of any reason to limit that. We should be treating all the board members equally. And because Dr. Roush is our staff person and gets into most of these matters in some fashion, thought that it made sense to notify his office. So with those comments, and one other item that we can talk about, excuse me, is the last sentence, which says a majority of the full board shall be required to waive the second reading of a resolution. And I asked, why is it a majority of the full board, which means at least 4 board members? If we only have 5 present, yes, we have a quorum for the board to move forward and be open for business. And a majority of that would be 3. The response was that it made sense because these are important matters often, and it made sense to make sure that the entire board has an opportunity to weigh in, and that those members that are absent are going to miss the conversation, miss the discussion, and not have an opportunity if something had changed to do that. So with those comments, anybody else who's got questions or thoughts?
So, Chair Brown, a couple of things prior to the comments that Dr. Roush made and your comments that I had when I read through this is it flexible enough to allow for the board to be nimble if it needs to be nimble? And the second question or comment that I had was on the waiver of second reading. I have found that when you give the ability to waive a second reading, generally speaking, there's never a second reading. If my experience in my previous employment is any indication, these resolutions would only be brought before the board once, not twice. So those were my 2 initial comments before the explanation and the discussion this morning. now I'm I'm a little concerned that we don't know what a resolution is, that it's not defined anywhere. And perhaps we should focus on what we're talking about before we talk about how to handle it. So those were my comments.
Yeah. Yeah, that was the first thing that occurred to me was that issue of what a resolution is. Um, and if we want in this policy to, to write a distinction uh, for those several categories.
And I would note that defining a resolution is as something that is non-routine. I'm not sure what non-routine means. That doesn't seem very specific.
Mm-hmm. Others? Uh, Phil. Oh, that's in a chat. Phil Hayes is on, and he's suggesting that it means binding, perhaps means no binding action required of the board. Phil, are you able to explain that a bit more?
Yes, thank you, Chair Brown. I was just thinking, in terms of like the resolutions that we use to commemorate individuals, occurrences, groups, those are resolutions of recognition versus resolutions of action. Putting a levy on the ballot, changing board policy, those kind of things. Much of what is in the board matters, I believe, section is called a resolution, but they serve many different purposes. And perhaps if we somehow figure a way to, maybe it's commemorative resolutions or honorific resolutions, I'm not sure. Just my thought there.
Mm-hmm. Anybody have further thoughts about that? Or an alternative way to distinguish or thoughts about whether we need to?
I've got some thoughts here. I guess I share all of your concerns about what is the solution, or what is the problem that we're trying to solve here. But it strikes me that the distinction between the first and second reading is in part going to be how much opportunity does the public have to weigh in on whatever the subject is. And it seems like there's going to be a world of difference between honoring somebody's long service to the district versus maybe expressing a political sentiment or something about some current event or policy issue. And something that is more controversial that could benefit from more public input really should, have a more fulsome opportunity for the public to weigh in. But that second reading part is really going to be the real opportunity to do so when people find out what is being proposed. But I'm also straining to think of how to define what is a resolution, what is actionable, and how to draw that distinction. But I also hear you on the board's time and is really precious. And time that is spent on these kinds of things is time that can't be spent on policy and things like that.
And again, some of these items are honorary, but some are also, as you said, and as we've talked about, they are positions the board takes on various pieces of legislation. There are some substantive matters that do come before the board that they do have resolutions for that are not the what I'll call kind of the routine legislation, which is typically the hiring or the approval of contracts and things like that. So I don't know if it's helpful to define it in the reverse by defining what it is not.
One other thought too, if the problem to be solved through this policy is trying to streamline and make more standardized, like what is the sort of honorarium process, maybe you could build a bridge from the other end by thinking about how do you want to decide what kinds of individual employees or staff or administrators, like if you want to have a process for honoring longtime service or extraordinary good things that is separate from this resolution process and have a separate policy for that.
I think that is something we should talk about and consider doing. I think that one of the difficulties I've had is that there are some of those resolutions that at times I don't think are appropriate for the board to do and to use our limited time to deal with. And yet, if it pertains to an organization or an individual, then once it's there, it's almost impossible to say no, to vote no. Certainly not, you don't want to embarrass somebody or make them uncomfortable. And once it's on the agenda, it's kind of, difficult. But if we can have some sort of a measure of what is and what is not going to be treated in that way, that might be useful.
If I could just add, I think Committee Member White, I really connect with what you're saying in terms of what are we trying to resolve? What's the issue? And I guess to this point, as a board member, I don't find that the resolutions have slowed us up. I don't find that we're taking a lot of pictures. We're not meeting in person. When we return back to in person, I think we had all made a joint effort to strategically within the meeting structure determine when best to take pictures, group pictures. And so I don't recall that resolutions have posed such an issue that we need to introduce legislation to address it. So that's one. Two, I think there's definite, if we as a committee decide to move forward with this, I think that there is definite value at clearly defining what a resolution is from other types of legislation. And I don't think you define that in terms of what it is not, but you define it in terms of what it is. In response to Dr. Roush's earlier comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Pierce. And as to the first part of what you had to say, I fully agree that these have not been problematic in any way this past year or, with this board. But many of you will remember back to when it was the board, did a lot more of that and took a lot more time with it. I think, if this resolution process has value, it would be to perhaps, even if it's just stated in non-mandatory terms, it may help guide the board, and it may help a board member that wants to speak up and say, why don't we limit this in some fashion? But I understand your point completely, and it's the board has chosen to operate that way, and I think that's good. But if somebody new comes in, they would have the opportunity to go back to a different way. Obviously, if the entire board wants to change the bylaw, which now would require only 5 votes, then it's, the board can do that. Thank you. Others? Does anybody have a suggestion for a definition or?
So I added a few words up there based on some conversations that and it'll be fortunate that President Adair will join us here shortly as well, because we can talk to her a little bit about this. But I know as I've talked with her, it's typically those that are either waiving policy or fees, because it's been the ones that have come up most recently. I think, a statement of the position of the board is typically the other type of resolution that we see. And the third category is really the honors recognition category. The honorary resolutions could certainly be its own bylaw. It could be left silent here. It could be excluded from this in its entirety and left be, based upon what everyone's intent is. But those are kind of the three, I guess, categories that I see at this point in time, that would kind of fit into this.
Dr. Roush, I just, this seems like a very onerous process for an honorary resolution. And I mean, I think it would be routine for, the waiving of the second reading on an honorary resolution. You're not going to make twice, right, to get honored or do that twice. So I would just not include, I would actually specifically exclude honorary resolutions from this process. That's just my opinion.
If we were to do that, do we want to write anything separately pertaining to honorary resolutions to at least suggest keeping those limited?
It seems like you have an opportunity also as a board to sort of set a marker for, what sort of standards of excellence are you looking for whenever you grant this honor. And I mean, you could do something like, decades of service or national recognition for their work, or, somebody saved a child's life, something like that. But I mean, you could define it, and that also could potentially also improve the transparency and equity of how that kind of honor is granted. If more people knew, here's what the process is, here's what the standard is. But I agree that, like, if you have those standards, then it should be more routine, and there should be an objective standard for how the board can decide how to make that decision. But on other things like, weighing on a piece of legislation, or, what does the board think about guns, for instance? I mean, you might have something where members of the community might have different voices that they would like to weigh in on a policy.
Thank you. And by the way, it's just approaching 9, so I believe that Jennifer will be joining us soon. And when she does, it would be good to take a break from this and move into the other policy, and we can come back to this at the end, or we can come back to this at the next meeting. There doesn't seem to be anything urgent about this particular policy or bylaw, and it sounds to me as though some further thought and suggestions from everybody in the committee would be useful. That aside, where are we? Somebody else have some thoughts?
I was just going to second what Joe Allen said. From the city council perspective, flexibility is really useful. And she's correct that once you enable flexibility through waiving second reading or emergency legislation, it gets utilized, right? I think on the opposite side of that, there are still the relationships among board members that kind of hold that intention, right? Because if Chair Brown, say you do something at the last minute and it turns out that a lot of your colleagues have quite a lot of passionate thoughts about it, they're going to let you know that they needed more time, and you're probably going to want to provide for that time. So I think even though that's informal, there is that internal likelihood that that's kind of what would happen. So, but that being said, just an example is when, when a community member who's made major contributions passes away, and the funeral is, just a couple of days away, and you want to have something in hand, being able to act immediately to pass something formal, to adopt a resolution formally for that person and bring it to their family, it becomes important and really helpful to be able to do that. The other thing I would just say is again, pulling very much from the council lens, and I know that this is not a city council, but nonetheless, we have 3 buckets. There are ordinances, there are ceremonial resolutions, and then there are actually, maybe Joellen, you can remember what they're called, but there are just other more formal resolutions that are denoted with an X next to their number. And those might be related to, filing a report with someone about property taxes, or acknowledging formally some sort of neighboring jurisdictions action related to development. So knowing those buckets, in your case, in the board's case, would be really helpful to know what kind of flexibility you want for each. So I know we've discussed it a bit, but I think having a really concrete understanding of what those are will aid our discussion in locking down what processes are best for each case.
Yeah, and if we speak to it, I think honorary resolutions would fit your category of ceremonial resolutions, and we might actually identify it with both terms, but that may be a way to make a distinction.
And again, we could, if dependent upon the desire, either the honorary resolution could be added as a part of this process, or it could be its own standalone bylaw that kind of talks about how that goes about. So I think I've heard what are the criteria to be used to kind of qualify for that, who can offer, who offers it. There are those number of questions I think that remain and linger out there in that area. I would I've not seen as many honorary resolutions since COVID, whether that's a function of the pandemic, or just a function of the board taking different approaches and choosing to honor individuals through comments or statements. I don't know, but certainly I would. There have been meetings where there have been a number of honorary resolutions, and there have been plenty of meetings where there are none. So. But I think, again, President Adair's point was much more on the waiver of policy or statements of, or position statements that may come out. The honorary piece kind of got added in here because I know it has been something that the chair has talked about before, and I know has been something near and dear to his heart. So they're kind of, I guess, two different categories there in and of themselves. And so, as we talk, it's really that board waiver and those statements that seem to be what this process is aimed at really trying to tackle. Just as we've talked here through, and as I've heard some other comments from board members and committee members trying to think through, what are some of the key issues. A lot of the other items are handled through what we call board legislation. Other school boards may call them board resolutions as well. We call them board legislation. They're kind of those more routine things that the board votes upon. So maybe by just limiting it to those two, that will be sufficient.
And just one other thought, Dr. Rausch, I know it sounds like some of this falls on your shoulders. I'm just looking at a potential kind of timeline crunch here. So at the top, it says there needs to be 1 week in advance of the meeting where the resolution needs to be provided. But then at the bottom, it says if someone wants to amend it, they have to and want your support, and that's what I don't know how frequent that is, then they also have to let you know within 1 week. So if the filer and the amender are not the same person, it creates a really tight window for wanting to seek your help. And then the question really then becomes, I mean, I think legislative work is always better with help of additional staff. And so if you've missed the 1 week deadline, then the amendment has to be drafted by the member alone. Since they've missed your deadline, I think it's just kind of an unfortunate thing that they're going to ask for your help later, and the best product will be even if they still do after they miss the deadline. So that's just something for you to reflect on how that's going to work.
And I think under A, and perhaps we need to phrase it a little differently under the written resolution drafted, but under the amendments, it says it should be provided. That doesn't mean it shall be provided. It says it should be provided. And that's kind of help us out, because so that we're not, 2 hours before the meeting and I'm scrambling to try to figure out how to create an amendment. And to be fair, we've done it on the fly, which is kind of why we've added let's take a time out and take a recess so that we have an opportunity to actually draft something, and we're not just trying to throw words out there to see how they fit. Because as you know, you may change something in one place, but what's the impact somewhere else down the line? You got to make sure that you don't cause conflicts within the same resolution. And so I think the more that we can do up front, the better off we are. But with the acknowledgement that there are going to be times where people are going to have those last minute changes. I don't know. I mean, do you think that, where it says the written resolution shall be provided at least 1 week in advance, should that also be a should? Kind of here's the best practice. Please, for the sake of your staff, get them to us in advance so that they can really work on it, versus a hard cutoff that if it's not there a week, then that resolution is going to be put off to the next meeting because you missed that initial deadline.
That's a hard question.
If I might just at this point, I think, again, I just want to echo that flexibility is key and important. I think back to the resolution on racism as a public health crisis. As a board member, or as the board member, that was an extremely important resolution to me, and to corral support and to corral my colleagues around that piece of resolution in a very short time span, in a time in which a national sense of insurgency started to increase around those types of resolutions, was an interesting process. And so I think as we consider this piece of legislation or new policy, again, I just want to echo that it's important for us to build in flexibility to ensure that when you have galvanizing, local, statewide or national issues that we need to speak to, because again, those can come up through the resolution process, that we provided that flexibility for individuals to do that in what will still be a timely manner. But I don't want the time frame to restrict individuals to be able to move quickly.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that whatever we would write in this policy, it should be flexible. And I think the board itself, obviously can choose not to follow this policy in any particular situation. We've had really good experience recently with this, these issues, and it's not burning as we're going. I think that's in part because the relationship among board members is so good and respectful, and I think that we can at times choose to move quickly, and we've done that. And at other times, choose to slow it down a bit so that not only all board members can weigh in and consider the matter, but also allow for some community input if the board chooses to do that. So I agree with you.
Does changing the shall to should, does that help? Do we need some extra language in here?
I would go with should.
Because that allows that if it's something that is come up very quickly, there's still the ability to act, because this it's not a disqualifier. It's just really helpful for the staff to have things in advance to help, especially if assistance is needed in drafting the resolution. So
I prefer the should over shall, because should implies that you can go around, where shall kind of seems more definitive in terms of it being at least 1 week.
Is that language sufficient? Is there anything else that's needed to be added for additional flexibility, or do we feel that this is sufficient?
Do we want to, in bullet point 3, include our internal auditor? I feel as if, since we're including the superintendent and the treasurer, we should also include the internal auditor. I think that would be valuable too, as the internal auditor and that office may signal some additional things we need to be mindful of.
Okay.
There's no downside to doing that.
Thank you.
That is simply looking at the state board and adding the superintendent and then their clerk to their board. So, which is your treasurer is technically your clerk of the board. So thank you. That's a good catch. And Ms. Adair has joined Chair Brown.
Wonderful. Good morning, Jennifer.
Good morning, everyone.
It's nice to see you. And thank you for taking the time to join us. We've been talking about the resolution process and have had good discussion on that. We've not yet settled on anything with this. And I have a feeling that we'll bring it back at our next meeting and try to think things through more fully. But the reason that I've wanted your participation, and I explained this a bit earlier to the committee, was that with the changes in committees, and it kind of across the board, all committees have been reorganized, realigned, repurposed, and all committees are now writing charters that match that vision and what's their purpose. What are they going to focus on? What are they no longer going to focus on? And in my view, the best person to explain that vision and to help us understand what it is this committee should focus on or should not focus on, and what our role is. You're the best person to do that, and maybe you can provide some thoughts and guidance and an explanation, and then I suspect folks on this committee will have questions. So.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Brown. First, let me thank all the members of the committee, because this committee has been doing just a ton of great work over the last year specifically, but even before then. And so, in this kind of restructure, reorganization, relook at our committees, I mean, rest assured, it had nothing to do with the fact that, you guys are doing amazing work. I think for me and this committee in particular, it almost became like you were doing all the work in some ways, because you were able to look at every single policy, no matter where it fell. And in reality, that started to bog down the processes. We recognized that there's a lot of policy work that needs to be done, especially after coming out of an academic audit. We have an HR audit. And with the new strategic plan that we're building, really just wanting to make sure our board work aligns with that much more clearly of the administration. So all of the committees got a little bit of a revamp, and we've brought a few new committees up to effectuate that alignment. With this committee, what the kind of shift is really you're becoming more of a governance policy. So things like you're working on right now, sorry, that's my guinea pig. Things that you're working on right now, things that are going to help the board govern better. Our bylaws, we went through a process a while ago where they were stripped down, and now we do Neola. I mean, it's really Neola basic. They need a really good look. And so there's just a lot around how we govern and how we do it better that I think that you guys can really, really dig into. While things like around, maybe academic policy or certain operation policies will now go to the subject matter committees. In talking to Dr. Roush, I also think that we needed a committee or something to help monitor who has what policy and where. So we kind of talked about this committee also being a rules type committee where you could help monitor and ensure that the board is moving across all policies. And if policies need to be reviewed by another committee, you help monitor that transition and where they are. And so kind of this idea of a rules committee, just like the legislature had, and Dr. Roush can talk more about that. He's more familiar. The other thing that I really wanted to add to this committee, and it comes with Dr. Roush's expertise around just advocacy. We had talked a lot about, and we have a lot of board members interested in doing more direct advocacy. As the largest district in the state of Ohio, we try to use our voice the best we can, but sometimes we just have Dr. Roush, and not just, he's amazing, but he's just one person. And so how do we support his work as a board? How do we really get the most value out of all the organizations that we are members of? And how do we advocate through those? As well as working more closely with our sister government agencies. So whether that be the county, the city, or, MORPC, other organizations that touch our district in a way, that really could, strengthening a partnership with them could really benefit how we look at and write policy for our district. The one of the things that I kind of folded in that what I think Chair Brown and the board members that sit here, Dr. Pearson and Vice Chair Cole, is the idea of the external board monitoring subcommittee. So that was a committee that was freestanding. We didn't seat it last year. And, I kind of joke, we have Facebook now. And so we have a lot of external board monitoring through comments, but, I think that it is a good, governance piece around, making sure that the board is acting efficiently and doing all the things that it should be doing as it carries out its business. So kind of coming back to that idea, I believe it was Vice Chair Cole that was instrumental in standing that up, I think, if I'm remembering that correctly. And so I think it has value, but kind of figuring out how that's going to kind of interplay. So basically what I've done is really focus this group on how to make the board work better, how to help us work better with our partners and how to advocate better. And so it's actually a really huge role, and something that is really critical to how we get everything done. So that's really what it is. I can answer questions. I will say, just like I told my operations committee, in this kind of restructure, none of it is meant to be a dictation. It still can be flexible as you are working through it with Chair Brown, Vice Chair Cole, and Dr. Pierce, and you are working on your charter, just like Chair mentioned. I want us to think about it and make sure we are being aligned. And, if something that I said here today and just kind of my thought process of why I did the realignment doesn't actually work, I don't want us to write it down. So you have the ability to, as you're kind of getting in and having discussions, and maybe what I said is too big. Maybe something should go somewhere else, and that's totally fine. So we want to have those conversations. All of the committees are having those conversations now, and re-looking at their charters. We are making them consistent. We're branding them so that everything, it looks the same. That's really important to me for structure and just transparency. And then everything will go up on new website update. So for the committees. So some of the policies that you've already been working on will stay with you. So the transgender policy, that's something you've already dug your hands into. It is a student policy around equity. So Dr. Blue, I know, is already involved. Our chief equity officer is part of every committee, so her work can appear everywhere. And so you guys will keep that because you already had a group working on it. And again, there might be other things that you could, we could create subgroups from one or two committees, depending on the subject matter. So, I just want this to work better, as I know all the board members do. And, in kind of working through this, everyone, had their thoughts and ideas about it. And so, I think I'm pretty excited about the direction. I feel like the structure is going to be a little bit clearer, and it's going to help us move a little bit faster through. So that's kind of where we are. Hopefully, Chair Brown, that met your expectations. And I can take questions if there are any.
I just realized I had muted myself. Sorry. Thank you very much for all of that information and your thoughts about what we're doing here. Committee, anybody have questions for board president? Oh, not hearing anything. Let me ask one that comes to mind. In part, Eric and I were talking about this the other day, or maybe last night. And that is the advocacy piece. I'm aware, like you are, that board members want to be more involved, want to play a bigger role, and want the, opportunities to go to the legislature, testify, and things of that sort. And I understand that, and that can be helpful. However, I keep falling back to allowing our professional, Dr. Roush, who's on top of all of this, make the call, or at least identify where having a board member come to the legislature would be helpful, and other times where it might not be helpful. And that he, in his role, has a much better handle on that than any of us. Some of us might see an issue, that they want the board to weigh in on in some fashion, and they want to go testify, and yet it could maybe interfere with or not fully support positions that he's taken on behalf of Columbus City Schools, or it might be the testimony typically isn't what shapes bills anyway. And the question is, perhaps it makes more sense for a board member to pick up the phone and personally call a legislator, especially where they might already have a relationship. And then the other part of the question is, okay, that may pertain to board members, but what about committee members? Are there times where it would make sense for somebody on this committee to be the point person and to lead? And the reality is that many of you are in other positions doing other full-time work, like Kelsey and Joellen and others, but that might conflict, that they might not want to be the person out there on behalf of the schools taking a position that may not be consistent with what their employer wants. And as much as it can be disclaimed when you testify, a certain amount, reflects back on your employer, no matter what you do, because that's how folks know you. So, what does anybody think about all this?
Let me talk a little bit more about that, because maybe I didn't explain it. So I know that when we do initially think of advocacy, like that is like, I don't like the number one thing, right, is to go testify. And that's really not, I mean, maybe I mentioned that, but that's what board members want to do, is I think what I said. What I want this committee to do is support the policy agenda, that the advocacy agenda that we adopt, right? So we have certain areas that Dr. Rausch works very hard on. What I think there is a deficiency in is this coordination of, and not from Dr. Rausch's standpoint, he's doing an amazing job, but in terms of kind of things that you pointed out, Chair, this kind of coordination between what Dr. Rausch does versus what we could be doing in these organizations that we are members and paid to be members of, right? Versus how we use formal, informal networks, how we, could work with public engagement committee to, stand up advocacy campaigns if that's what we need to. I don't foresee this, unless any of you want to, it wasn't that you would be advocating, that wasn't the ask. I mean, this is the kind of oversight structural committee. So kind of the alignment, right? So, saying, what, Dr. Rausch is working on this policy over here, and we're advocating in the legislature, but are we doing everything as a board to also advocate and, align in our other pieces, right? Do we need to be looking at building different relationships, or going to the school, Ohio State School Board Association, or using Council Great City Schools, or all of us sit on something and we aren't leveraging that. We aren't leveraging our voice in these organizations to support the great work that Dr. Rausch is doing. And so really it's kind of taking I guess I'm not, the committee doesn't advocate itself. It's making sure that we're supporting Dr. Rausch and looking holistically at the advocacy to make sure that we are doing it in a way that strategically moves us forward faster. And so, but again, this is all, if you all think that makes no sense, it was just a gap that I saw that felt like we could make some strides in that, and kind of putting it out here, and it aligns obviously with the good work that Dr. Roush is doing as the leader of as the staff leader, admin leader of this committee. I don't know if that was more helpful, Chair Brown. Maybe I explained a little better. Yeah, but we're not looking for anyone to go do testimony. And just like exactly you said, I have this conversation with Dr. Roush as well all the time. We are here to be supportive. And I said, if you need me to go in, I'll go in. If you don't, tell me. I mean, that's what we do as board members. So.
Thank you. And yes, that is helpful. And but it was, I think, an item that really will take some discussion by this committee to flesh out, to write into the charter or not. And just wanted to make sure we have the thoughts out there, the issues, and what to consider as we go through this. So thank you. Some other questions on this or anything?
Not to beat a dead horse, but I do just want to add that it's very important that as our community members share their time and expertise with us, that we provide them opportunities to advocate as individuals. And so I think as much as possible on every committee that we have, our leadership teams, because every committee should and does, by the structure that President Adair has put in place, has 3 board members on that committee providing leadership. So I feel that our leadership teams should help our volunteers, our committee members, understand that there's time and space for them to take off their committee member hats and advocate as individuals, as a part of our community, if they so see it within, if they see that it's important to go down and give testimony and advocate for particular issues or advocate against a particular issue, that we make it very clear that that is welcomed, and help them understand, I guess, how they can do that as an individual versus as a representative of the committee. And if there are opportunities where the committee would like committee members to go give testimony and advocate for various issues, that we also help them understand how to navigate those situations while wearing their committee hats. So I'm a strong proponent that the power within our democracy lies in the people, and that we should provide opportunities for individuals to advocate and to share their voice, whether those are our youngest of students or our oldest of community members. Everybody's voice is valuable and important.
To Dr. Pierce's point, I will say, Eric I've seen Eric at the State House. I've seen the work that he does. He does a phenomenal job. I think you're really in good hands there. And I think you really have to be strategic on how committee members actually advocate. I mean, Dr. Roush knows the same way Kelsey does, and myself, that the legislature is completely controlled by Republicans. And so whatever efforts you use have to be garnered around that. And you just have to be strategic on what you say and the way you go about doing things. And I think it's great that committee members want to testify, or students want to testify, and that's part of the process. But a lot of the issues get ironed out behind the scenes. And testimony, honestly, if you're testifying and it's usually you're already losing. So it depends on what the issue is. I'm just being honest with you. I've never gone into a situation where I've had to testify on anything. Right. And I've been doing this for a while. It's done behind the scenes. Most of the things are ironed out behind closed doors. And if you're testifying on an issue, it could already be over. So not to say that you shouldn't do it. I just, I wanted to make that clear and put that out there in front of the group. So that's my 2 cents, if it matters.
If
And
I could,
sometimes they want you to testify so that you're out there to help provide that cover for them and support
100%.
so that they can move that thing along. So
Yeah.
we've had those requests before too.
Absolutely. And I mean, look, like you've got Dr. Roush. I mean, I know you got Claire Bennett too. I mean, they're doing a great job. So I would just be aware, like, you know, I've seen people do this and go down this path where, you know, you want a lot of individuals involved, but then you don't know what one person is saying and they could be saying something different. And, you know, then Dr. Roush gets a phone call from a member on a committee saying, hey, like, you know, one of your committee members said something completely opposite to what, you know, you've been telling me. And that's how it becomes a mess. So I've seen it happen before. It happens. And so I think you just have to be strategic on the way you do it.
Let me just again say that I appreciate all those comments, and we keep getting really focused on the legislature, which is fine. But what I'm saying is this advocacy piece is a lot bigger than just the state house, right? And it's advocacy, even like, you know, the potential. I don't know. Like, that's what I need this committee to like dig into a little bit, right? I mean, how do we advocate better with our parents, with our neighborhood groups, with our PTAs? You know, how do we do that better, right? It isn't just Dr. Roush got the state house. Like, that's not what I'm worried about. I mean, we're all there to help as needed. But it's more of that holistic coordination to make sure that what Dr. Roush is doing at the State House, our communities also understand their role and place in, right? And so it is a little bit more holistic. But, you know, we get that this is part of, you know, a government political system. So, you know, things like you just mentioned, Jared, are very, very true. But also things like Dr. Pierce mentioned. I mean, this is about also teaching our communities about how to advocate and do it correctly. One thing I forgot to ask, because some other committees have asked this, we have some committees that are interested in adding a student as like a non-voting member, but someone who participates. So if that is something that you could be interested in, let me know, because we're kind of working on that to figure out how many and an application process. I forgot to mention that earlier.
I think advocating at a local level, you know, with your relationship, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I don't want, and maybe I misinterpreted what you were saying, so I apologize for that. But I will say, I think that's great. I think you should. Whatever relationships members have on this committee, they should absolutely be utilized within student groups or parent groups or, you know, PTO or at the local level too. I mean, I think that's a great idea. So I was talking more so legislature. So
Thank you. That's where my focus had been as well. So, you know, I appreciate your thoughts, Jennifer, and you know, explaining and expanding what that means to advocate. Some other thoughts, other questions for our board president.
I really loved the idea of focusing a little bit more on the bottom up advocacy, because I think that we just have to be honest, like not all of our schools are in not all of our schools are our communities is well organized. Not every school has a PTO. Not every PTO is set up in a way that everybody can participate, especially in our schools that are like school choice schools rather than neighborhood schools, where people might be drawn from lots of different communities. And in the absence of a clear way to get involved, a clear way to connect to others in the community, I think that's where issues can arise, they can simmer, and they can go unaddressed. But we're also sort of losing that opportunity to educate and engage our communities in trying to solve problems. And I think that in the absence of that, that's also where you have people feel like their voice is not heard and simply slip away, move to a different community, enroll in a private school or a charter school. And I think you kind of see that with our attrition between kindergarten and 12th grade. And I think I especially fear what's going to happen this year with the kind of disruption that we've all had in our lives. But in terms of the advocacy, I mean, our strength is always going to be in the power of our individual stories and educating and helping people understand when and how do you engage in the process? And I do like the idea of involving it in the local level, but one of them might be, how can families and community members engage more with this board? And I think that on the Policy Review Committee, we have really had an eye on how can people understand more of what the board's doing and when they are making a choice, and how can the public make its voice heard just within the policies that the district is doing. And I just wanted to say one other thing about the legislature too. I always try to tamp down my cynicism, but I represent consumers in foreclosure defense. I sue payday lenders, and I do a lot of work where the legislature is often doing work that I disagree with. And I actually go and testify all the time, and it's never in favor of good legislation. It's always against bad legislation. And sometimes I only find out about it on the 5th reading in the committee, on the day before it's going to pass. And I go anyway, and I say my piece. Almost always afterwards, I will get more engagement and be invited into the room where the decisions are made. And so I think that, building up and inviting more members of our community and more of our friends to engage in that process is always a good thing. But I think it's also important to be mindful of what hat are they wearing and what role are they playing. And I really like what Jennifer Adair was saying about, maybe building up more confidence and more knowledge. Actually, I think Dr. Pierce was saying this as well, about the process, so that people feel comfortable participating and sharing their voice.
Thank you.
Emily, you as you started talking about, I just the kind of idea. So the committees themselves, all of them, have natural cross-pollination. And so that's one of these things that this committee will kind of help see. So as you were speaking about, how you said advocacy and engagement, right, of our communities. So we do have an engagement committee. So that will be one of those things where, and Dr. Pierce is on that. So we strategically also have cross-pollinated leadership. How is it, and we will have to decide, like, what work is done where, how do we work together, what's cross collaboration, cross pollination, is this advocacy, is this engagement, what's the difference? I mean, you guys are building it. I don't have answers for these things. And as every committee is kind of looking at it and trying to figure out, okay, here's kind of our stuff, here's what we could be kind of in the middle, and we'll figure out where it goes. But just know that it is, these lines do get blurry. And especially if the focus is on that kind of low, very important, I don't want to call it bottom, that sounds not as good, but like the local level, I think somebody used that term. School communities or communities, that idea of, maybe we have to engage them to learn, so they learn how to advocate, right? And then what is the thing they're advocating, or how are we helping them, or how are they advocating with us? Like you said, Emily, I think that's a really good idea, because that's what we hear. A lot of people just don't understand our own processes and how to participate in them. So I just wanted to kind of chime in there. And I kind of interrupted Dr. Pierce, so I apologize for that. But that kind of idea about the lines of the committees are blurry kind of intentionally, because we know that the work is holistic. And so sometimes we will just have to decide as two committees where the work fits, or if it's something we collaborate on.
My comments were related, or are related to, one, let me say that there's definite value in having our students serve on our committees, and to serve on our committees as voting members, because again, they're given their time and they're given their ideas, and we want them to be engaged and active in the process. And so again, I think in that regard, we should honor them by allowing their voice and vote to matter. But what I will say, when it comes to this committee, and I think we have two more that may meet very early in the morning, that we be flexible when it comes to accepting the student through the application process, whatever process we choose, that we be flexible in the timing of this meeting, that we may have to look at seniors or juniors that have our credit, our College Credit Plus engagement. And so maybe they can be flexible with their schedules. Maybe it's a senior in a government class and that teacher is willing to provide them with flex credit where they're serving on our committee, but also completing additional work so that that student can get credit, actual academic credit for their service through our committees. And President Adair, if you need help or direction and where to get that information, I can share with you, or I'm sure somebody from our administration can share it. But I think as not just this committee, but all of our committees, we have to think creatively on how we can engage those students. And I definitely support the student having a voting voice, and then also whatever we can do to leverage this opportunity, again, by providing them with credit through that flex credit and enriching the experience for them so they can maybe do an assignment connected to it, give testimony, whether through the legislature or the local level, as one, a student on their own behalf, or two, as a committee member.
And depending on what we need to do, actually figuring out if we need a board policy around or somewhere in the academic policy, Dr. Pierce, for that committee, about how would we write that. So that this might be additional work for those committees. I love it.
Yeah, it might be good to address those concerns about students. For somebody to look at it as to all committees, wherever the students may be serving, and it's probably going to be pretty much the same. And it seems to me that the academic committee should be one that speaks to that, as well as making sure that our administrators, if we're talking about making this for academic credit, I think we really need to make sure we have administrators fully supporting doing that. But that's good. That's helpful. Thank you. Anybody else? I think what we need to do, and given the time, we're not going to be getting back to the resolution process for discussion today. We'll take up both of these at our next meeting. It's also possible that we'll have some routine Neola work by then. But these are important, and important that we get them right. So I think that the conversation today as to both of these has been really helpful to me, and I suspect others, and that to the extent possible, you give some thought to these, and come prepared with some suggestions or questions, or even ideas that you've written out for how to modify this policy. To the extent possible, share those ideas sooner rather than later. That 1 week time frame that we talked about in the resolution process policy applies here. We want to make sure that our staff person, Eric Rausch, has the time that he needs to kind of pull various ideas together and make sure he can present them in written form for the committee. Does anybody have any additional questions about where we're headed and what we need to do? Well, hearing none, thank you all for your time and service. We've got, up to 10 more minutes, but we don't have to spend it. Anybody have anything else for the attention of this committee?
I motion that we adjourn.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any opposed? The adjournment is approved. Thank you all. And we'll talk soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend and week.